Sarah
to follow
Martinez
orders.
never thought her
You will
morning
follow
coffee
orders
run
or
would
face the
end with her face
consequences.
I
pressed
stand
against
by
the
my
cold
actions.
pavement, handcuffs cutting into her wrists. The autumn air in downtown Seattle carried the usual mix of coffee and rain, but now it also carried the weight of public humiliation as curious onlookers gathered around the scene unfolding outside Pike Place Market. It started innocently enough. Sarah had been running late for her job at the software company where she worked as a data analyst. Her alarm hadn't gone off, and she'd thrown on the first clothes she could find, a pair of jeans and an old military-style jacket she'd picked up at a thrift store months ago. The jacket was comfortable and warm, perfect for Seattle's unpredictable weather. She never paid much attention to the patches and insignia sewn onto it, assuming they were just decorative additions from whoever owned it before. The morning rush was typical chaos. Sarah grabbed her laptop bag, checked her phone for messages, and hurried out of her small apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. She had exactly 20 minutes to grab coffee and make it to the office for an important presentation she'd been preparing for weeks. The presentation could mean a promotion, something she desperately needed after struggling to make ends meet in one of the country's most expensive cities. As she walked quickly down Pine Street, Sarah noticed a few people giving her odd looks, but she attributed it to typical city life. People in Seattle were generally polite, but kept to themselves. She ducked into her favorite coffee shop, a small local place called Grind Coffee that served the best lattes in the neighborhood. The barista, a young guy named Marcus who knew her usual order, seemed to do a double take when he saw her. "Hey Sarah, that's quite a jacket you've got there," Marcus said, his voice carrying an uncertain tone she'd never heard from him before. Sarah glanced down at herself, finally, taking a closer look at what she was wearing. The jacket was olive green with various patches and insignia. She could make out what looked like military unit patches, ribbons, and some kind of special forces insignia. There were also several medals and decorations attached to the chest area. To Sarah, they just looked like military memorabilia, the kind of thing you might find in any army surplus store. "Oh, this old thing? I got it at a thrift store. Pretty authentic looking, right?" Sarah smiled, completely unaware of the gravity of what she was wearing. Marcus's expression grew more uncomfortable. "Sarah, I think you should know that those aren't just replicas. That jacket has some pretty serious military decorations on it. My brother served in Afghanistan, and some of those patches, they're from special operations units." Sarah felt a small knot form in her stomach, but she tried to brush off the concern. "Really? Well, whoever donated it must have been quite the soldier. Anyway, can I get my usual? I'm running super late." As Marcus prepared her latte, Sarah noticed that other customers in the coffee shop were staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to outright anger. An older man in the corner booth kept glaring at her over his newspaper. A woman with a military haircut was whispering urgently to her companion while pointing in Sarah's direction. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her boss. "Don't forget about the presentation this morning. The whole executive team will be there." The pressure of the day ahead made her push aside her growing unease about the jacket. She had bigger things to worry about than some old military patches. When Marcus handed her the coffee, his expression was troubled. "Sarah, maybe you should consider changing clothes before you go out. Some people take military honors very seriously, and wearing those decorations when you haven't earned them, well, it's called stolen valor. It's actually illegal." "Illegal?" Sarah laughed nervously. "Come on, Marcus. I bought this at a thrift store. I'm not pretending to be anyone. It's just a jacket." But even as she said it, Sarah began to feel increasingly self-conscious about the stares she was receiving. She decided to take the long way to her office, avoiding the main pedestrian areas where she might encounter more people. Unfortunately, her route took her past the waterfront, where a veterans' memorial service was taking place. As she hurried along the sidewalk, trying to stay inconspicuous, she found herself walking directly past a group of veterans who were gathering for the ceremony. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Hey you." An older veteran with a Vietnam veteran's cap called out to her. "What unit did you serve with?" Sarah froze, realizing she was in serious trouble. I'm sorry, what?" "Those patches on your jacket," the veteran said, his voice growing louder and attracting attention from the growing crowd. "The 75th Ranger Regiment, Special Forces, Purple Heart, Bronze Star with V device. When did you serve? What was your MOS?" The military terminology flew over Sarah's head completely. She had no idea what an MOS was or what any of the decorations on her jacket represented. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not in the military. This is just a jacket I bought at a thrift store. Another veteran stepped forward, his face red with anger. You bought a decorated soldier's jacket at a thrift store and decided to wear it around like it's a fashion statement. The situation escalated quickly. More veterans gathered around Sarah, their voices rising as they pointed out various insignia and decorations on her jacket. Each patch seemed to represent something significant, something earned through sacrifice and service that Sarah could never understand. That's a Ranger tab, one man said, pointing at her shoulder. You know what it takes to earn that? Months of the hardest training the Army has to offer. And that Purple Heart, a woman veteran added, her voice thick with emotion. That means someone bled for their country. Someone was wounded in service to America. Sarah's heart was racing now. The crowd of veterans was growing larger, and she could see that some of them were taking photos of her with their phones. The memorial service had been forgotten as word spread about the young woman wearing stolen military honors. Please, Sarah tried to explain, her voice shaking. I had no idea. I was just running late for work, and I grabbed the first jacket I could find. I would never intentionally disrespect anyone's service. But her explanations fell on deaf ears. The veterans saw only what appeared to be a civilian wearing decorations that represented years of sacrifice, training, and, in some cases, trauma that many of them still carried. To them, she was making a mockery of everything they had endured. Someone in the crowd called the police, and, within minutes, 2 Seattle police officers arrived at the scene. The situation had grown so heated that the officers had to push through a crowd of angry veterans to reach Sarah, who was now backed against a railing overlooking Elliott Bay. Ma'am, we need you to come with us, one of the officers said, his hand resting on his radio. We've received multiple reports of stolen valor. Stolen valor? Sarah's voice cracked. I don't even know what that means. This is all just a huge misunderstanding. The Stolen Valor Act makes it a federal crime to falsely claim military honors, the second officer explained. Wearing those decorations when you haven't earned them is a violation of federal law. As the officer spoke, Sarah noticed that news crews were beginning to arrive. Someone had called the local media, and she could see cameras being set up across the street. Her worst nightmare was unfolding before her eyes. Not only was she about to be arrested, but it was going to be broadcast for the entire city to see. The first officer began reading Sarah her rights as he placed handcuffs on her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin, and she felt tears streaming down her face. The crowd of veterans watched with grim satisfaction as she was led toward the police car. This is insane, Sarah sobbed. I work in tech. I analyze data for a living. I would never, ever try to pretend I was a soldier. I don't know anything about the military. But her protests seemed only to anger the crowd further. To them, her ignorance was just another insult. How could someone be so careless with symbols that meant everything to the men and women who had earned them? As Sarah was placed in the back of the police car, she caught a glimpse of herself in the car's window. For the first time, she really saw what everyone else was seeing. The jacket was covered with patches, ribbons, and medals. Even to her untrained eye, it was obvious that this wasn't just a fashion accessory. This was someone's military history, someone's record of service and sacrifice. The drive to the police station was a blur of sirens, radio chatter, and Sarah's own panicked thoughts. She kept thinking about the presentation she was supposed to give, about her job, about her reputation. By now, her photo was probably all over social media. Her life as she knew it was over, and she didn't even understand why. At the police station, Sarah was processed like any other criminal. Her fingerprints were taken, her mugshot was captured from multiple angles, and she was placed in a holding cell to await her initial court appearance. The concrete walls and fluorescent lighting made everything feel surreal, like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. Hours passed before anyone came to speak with her. During that time, Sarah had plenty of opportunity to think about how she'd ended up in this situation. She thought about the thrift store where she'd bought the jacket, wondering about the person who had donated it. Had it belonged to a veteran who had passed away? Had someone donated their parents' or spouse's military memorabilia without understanding its significance? When a detective finally came to interview her, Sarah told her story from the beginning. She explained about being late for work, about grabbing the first warm jacket she could find, about having no knowledge of military culture or protocol. The detective listened patiently, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Ms. Martinez, the detective said when she finished her account, I believe that you didn't intend to deceive anyone. But the law is very clear about wearing military decorations you haven't earned. Regardless of your intent, you violated federal law. What happens now? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You'll have an initial court appearance where formal charges will be read. You'll need a lawyer. And I have to tell you, this case has already attracted significant media attention. The story is all over the local news and social media. Sarah's heart sank even further. She thought about her parents, who lived across the country and would probably see their daughter's arrest on the news. She thought about her coworkers, her friends, her neighbors. Everyone would think she was the kind of person who would fake military service for attention or respect. The irony wasn't lost on her. Sarah had always had tremendous respect for military service members. Her grandfather had served in World War II, and she had grown up hearing stories of his courage and sacrifice. She would never intentionally mock or diminish that legacy. But intent didn't matter now. The damage was done, and Sarah was facing federal charges that could result in significant fines and even prison time. All because of a jacket she'd bought for $15 at a thrift store, never imagining the firestorm it would create. As she sat in her cell, Sarah couldn't help but wonder about the real owner of those military honors. Somewhere out there was a veteran who had earned every patch, every medal, every ribbon through service and sacrifice. That person's achievements were now at the center of a controversy that was spiraling out of control. Little did Sarah know that the jacket's true owner was much closer than she could have imagined, and that the story behind those decorations was more extraordinary than anyone could have guessed. The tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve, a tattoo she had gotten years ago during a rebellious phase in college, would soon change everything about how this case was viewed. But for now, all Sarah could do was wait in her cell and hope that somehow someone would believe her story and help her find a way out of the nightmare her life had become. The holding cell at the Seattle Police Department became Sarah's world for the next 18 hours. The concrete bench was uncomfortable, the fluorescent lights never dimmed, and the constant noise from other detainees made sleep impossible. Every few hours, an officer would bring her a meal that she barely touched, her stomach too knotted with anxiety to handle food. By morning, Sarah's story had exploded across social media. Videos of her arrest had been shared thousands of times, accompanied by angry comments from veterans and their families. The hashtag #StolenValorSeattle was trending, and Sarah's face was being broadcast on news stations across the country. She had become the poster child for everything wrong with civilians who appropriated military honors. Her court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking public defender named James Walsh, arrived early that morning to prep her for her initial appearance. Walsh had handled dozens of stolen valor cases, and most of them followed a predictable pattern. Someone seeking attention or respect would wear unearned military decorations, get caught, and face the consequences. Ms. Martinez, Walsh said as he reviewed her file, I have to be honest with you. The evidence is pretty clear-cut. You were wearing military decorations you didn't earn, and there are dozens of witnesses and video evidence. The best I can probably do is negotiate a plea deal that minimizes your sentence. Sarah felt her last hope slipping away. Mr. Walsh, I swear to you, I had no idea what I was wearing. I bought that jacket at a thrift store. I've never claimed to be in the military. I don't even know what most of those patches mean. Walsh had heard similar claims before, though he had to admit that Sarah seemed genuinely distressed rather than defiant like most of his stolen valor clients. The problem is that intent doesn't matter under the law. The Stolen Valor Act prohibits wearing certain military decorations regardless of why you're wearing them. What kind of sentence am I looking at? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Well, the good news is that the current version of the law only criminalizes wearing decorations if you're trying to obtain money, property, or some other tangible benefit. Since you were just walking to get coffee, the penalties are less severe. You're probably looking at a fine and community service, maybe some probation. As they talked, Sarah absently rubbed her left forearm, where an old tattoo was hidden beneath her sleeve. The tattoo was something she'd gotten during her sophomore year of college, back when she was going through what her mother called her rebellious phase. It was a small, intricate design that most people assumed was just decorative. Sarah had never told anyone the real story behind it, and she'd almost forgotten about it herself until the stress of her current situation brought back memories she'd long suppressed. The initial court appearance was a nightmare. The courtroom was packed with reporters, veterans advocates, and curious onlookers who had seen the story on the news. As Sarah was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, she could hear the angry murmurs from the gallery. Someone shouted, "Fake soldier," before the bailiff restored order. Federal Judge Patricia Hernandez presided over the hearing. Judge Hernandez was known for her tough stance on stolen valor cases, having served as a military attorney before joining the federal bench. She had little patience for people who appropriated military honors. "Ms. Martinez," Judge Hernandez said as Sarah stood before the bench, "you're charged with violating the Stolen Valor Act by wearing military decorations you did not earn. How do you plead?" Sarah's voice was barely audible as she said, "Not guilty, Your Honor." A collective murmur of disapproval rippled through the courtroom. Many people had expected her to plead guilty and accept responsibility for her actions. Her not guilty plea seemed to confirm their suspicions that she was unrepentant and looking for attention. The prosecution, represented by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chun, laid out their case efficiently. They had video evidence of Sarah wearing the decorated jacket, witness testimony from multiple veterans who had confronted her, and expert testimony about the significance of the military honors she had been wearing. "Your Honor," Chun said, "the defendant was wearing a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star with V device, Ranger and Special Forces tabs, and multiple unit patches representing some of the most elite and respected units in the U.S. military. These decorations represent the highest levels of sacrifice and service. To wear them casually, as a fashion statement, shows a profound disrespect for our military and our veterans." Walsh did his best to present Sarah's side of the story, emphasizing her ignorance about military protocol and her lack of intent to deceive anyone. But even he had to admit that the evidence against her was overwhelming. The hearing concluded with Judge Hernandez setting a trial date 6 weeks away and releasing Sarah on her own recognizance. As she left the courthouse, Sarah was surrounded by reporters shouting questions and protesters holding signs supporting veterans' rights. The weeks that followed were the worst of Sarah's life. Her employer, a tech company that prided itself on supporting military veterans, placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of her case. Her photo was shared constantly on social media, accompanied by increasingly vile comments and threats. She had to disconnect her phone and stay off the internet entirely to maintain her sanity. Sarah moved back in with her parents in Portland, unable to face the hostile environment in Seattle. Her childhood bedroom felt like a prison as she waited for her trial date, knowing that her life had been permanently altered by a single, innocent mistake. It was during this dark period that Sarah began to remember details about the tattoo on her forearm that she hadn't thought about in years. The design wasn't random or decorative as most people assumed. It was actually a highly specialized piece of identification that she'd received during a brief but intense period of her life that she'd never spoken about publicly. When Sarah was 19, during the summer between her sophomore and junior years of college, she had participated in what she thought was a study abroad program in Eastern Europe. The program was sponsored by what appeared to be a legitimate academic consortium, and Sarah had been selected based on her exceptional performance in computer science and her proficiency in multiple languages. What Sarah didn't know at the time was that the academic program was actually a cover for a highly classified intelligence operation. The participants, all college students with specific skill sets, were being evaluated for potential recruitment into various government agencies. The program involved intensive training in surveillance techniques, cryptography, and cultural immersion. During the program, all participants received what they were told was a cultural identification tattoo that would help them blend in with local populations. The tattoos appeared to be traditional Eastern European designs, but they actually contained embedded coding that identified the bearer as having participated in the classified program. Sarah had never learned the true nature of the program she'd participated in. To her, it had just been an interesting summer abroad where she'd learned some unusual skills and made friends with other students from around the world. When she returned to college, she finished her degree and moved on with her life, rarely thinking about that summer except when people asked about her tattoo. But now, as she faced federal charges for stolen valor, fragments of that summer began to resurface. She remembered the intense training sessions, the emphasis on operational security, and the strange sense that there was more going on than the academic program they'd been told about. Most troubling of all, Sarah began to remember a conversation she'd had with one of the program instructors, a gruff man in his 50s who had introduced himself only as Colonel Davies. Near the end of the program, Davies had pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "You've shown exceptional aptitude," Davies had told her. "There may be opportunities for you in the future, opportunities to serve your country in ways that most people never could. If those opportunities arise, someone will contact you using specific protocols. Until then, never speak about this program to anyone. Not your parents, not your friends, not even other participants." Sarah had dismissed the conversation as dramatic nonsense at the time. She was just a college kid who wanted to study computer science and maybe work for a tech company someday. The idea of serving her country in some mysterious capacity seemed like something out of a spy novel. But now, facing the destruction of her reputation and possible federal conviction, Sarah began to wonder if there was more to that summer than she had understood. The tattoo on her arm, which she had always assumed was decorative, might actually be significant in ways she had never imagined. As her trial date approached, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She contacted her attorney and told him about the tattoo and the program she had participated in years earlier. Walsh listened to her story with growing skepticism. "Sarah," Walsh said when she finished, "I understand you're desperate, but making up stories about secret government programs isn't going to help your case. If anything, it might make you look delusional." But Sarah persisted. She provided Walsh with what documentation she could find from the program, including her acceptance letter and some photographs from that summer. Walsh agreed to look into it, though he warned her not to get her hopes up. What Walsh discovered when he began investigating surprised him. The academic consortium that had sponsored Sarah's program did exist, but it was funded through a complex web of grants and contracts that ultimately traced back to various government agencies. The program Sarah had described was real, though its true purpose remained classified. More significantly, when Walsh contacted the State Department to inquire about the program, he was immediately transferred to a specialized office that dealt with sensitive academic partnerships. The official he spoke with became very interested when Walsh mentioned Sarah's name and the specific program she had participated in. Within 24 hours, Walsh received a call from a federal attorney in Washington, D.C., who requested an urgent meeting about Sarah's case. The attorney wouldn't discuss details over the phone, but made it clear that there were aspects of Sarah's background that might be relevant to her current legal situation. As Sarah's trial date loomed, it became clear that her simple stolen valor case was about to become something much more complicated. The jacket she had bought at a thrift store and the tattoo she had received as a college student were about to intersect in ways that would shock everyone involved in her case. Meanwhile, in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., Admiral Rebecca Sterling was reviewing classified files when a particular case caught her attention. The file contained surveillance photos from the arrest in Seattle, and one detail in those photos made the Admiral stop everything she was doing. There, clearly visible in one of the photos as Sarah was being handcuffed, was a tattoo on her left forearm. To most people, it would look like an abstract design, maybe something with Eastern European influences. But to Admiral Sterling, who had overseen the classified program that created those tattoos, it was immediately recognizable as something that should have remained deeply buried in the intelligence community's most protected files. The tattoo meant that Sarah Martinez wasn't just some random civilian who had made a mistake with a thrift store jacket. She was connected to one of the most sensitive intelligence operations of the past decade, an operation so classified that even most government officials didn't know it existed. Admiral Sterling reached for her secure phone, knowing that she was about to make a call that would turn the stolen valor case upside down and potentially expose secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. Admiral Rebecca Sterling's secure phone call set off a chain reaction that reached the highest levels of the intelligence community within hours. In her 30-year career, Sterling had overseen some of the most sensitive operations in U.S. military intelligence, but The sight of Sarah Martinez's tattoo in those arrest photos had shaken her more than any battlefield report ever could. The tattoo wasn't just a marker from a college program gone wrong. It was evidence of Operation Deep Current, a classified intelligence initiative that Sterling had personally designed and supervised. The operation had been so sensitive that fewer than 20 people in the entire government knew of its existence, and most of those people believed it had been terminated years ago. Operation Deep Current had been Sterling's response to a growing intelligence gap in the early 2000s. Traditional methods of gathering information in certain regions had become increasingly difficult as foreign governments became more sophisticated in their counterintelligence efforts. The solution was to create a network of assets who had no apparent connection to the U.S. government, college students participating in legitimate academic programs who could be trained in basic intelligence gathering without ever knowing they were working for the CIA. The program had operated for 3 years, recruiting exceptional college students through carefully crafted study abroad opportunities. These students received intensive training in surveillance, communications, and cultural immersion, all disguised as academic coursework. Upon completion, they returned to their normal lives with enhanced skills and a special tattoo that served as both identification and a way to activate their services if needed in the future. Sarah Martinez had been one of the program's most promising participants. Her combination of technical skills, linguistic ability, and psychological profile had made her an ideal candidate. But, like all the others, she had been told that her participation was purely academic, and she had returned to college with no knowledge of the true nature of her summer abroad. The program had been officially terminated in 2005 after a security review determined that the risk of exposure was too great. All records were classified at the highest levels, and the participants were left to live normal lives, their true service to their country unknown even to themselves. Now, nearly 20 years later, one of those participants was facing federal charges for wearing military decorations she hadn't earned, while wearing a tattoo that proved she had actually served her country in ways that most military personnel never would. Admiral Sterling's first call was to CIA Director Patricia Vance, a career intelligence officer who had been briefed on Operation Deep Current when she took over the agency, but had never expected it to surface again. "Madam Director," Sterling began carefully, "we have a situation involving one of our former Deep Current assets." The line was silent for a moment as Vance processed what she was hearing. "Admiral, I thought all Deep Current materials were sealed. How is this possible?" Sterling explained about Sarah's arrest and the visible tattoo that had identified her as a program participant. "The situation is becoming more complicated by the hour," Sterling continued. "Can we make the charges disappear without raising suspicions?" "That's the problem," Sterling replied. "This case has received enormous media attention. Veterans groups are watching closely, and any hint of government interference will only fuel conspiracy theories. We need a solution that satisfies everyone involved while protecting operational security." Within hours, a small team of intelligence and legal experts had assembled in a secure conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley. The challenge before them was unprecedented: how to resolve a federal criminal case without exposing state secrets or appearing to give special treatment to someone accused of dishonoring military service. The team's legal advisor, Deputy Attorney General Michael Harrison, had dealt with classified information cases before, but never one quite like this. "The Classified Information Procedures Act gives us some tools to work with," Harrison explained to the group. "We can request a closed hearing where classified evidence can be presented to the judge without public disclosure. But intelligence community lawyers raised concerns about even that limited exposure. Any hint that there's classified information involved in a stolen Valor case will draw attention we can't afford," warned CIA General Counsel Sarah Kim. "We need to find a way to resolve this that appears completely routine." Meanwhile, in Seattle, Sarah's attorney James Walsh was dealing with his own crisis. The federal attorney from Washington, D.C. who had contacted him had flown to Seattle for an urgent meeting, but what Walsh learned in that meeting had left him more confused than ever. Mr. Walsh, the federal attorney, who identified himself only as Mr. Thompson, had said, "I need you to understand that there are aspects of your client's background that are classified at the highest levels of government. I can't give you specifics, but Ms. Martinez is not the person she appears to be." Walsh had practiced law for 15 years and thought he'd seen everything. But this was beyond his experience. Are you saying she actually has military service that's classified? Because if that's the case, we need to present that evidence in court. It's more complicated than that, Thompson had replied. Ms. Martinez performed service for her country, but it wasn't traditional military service, and she may not even be aware of the true nature of what she did. We're working on a solution, but in the meantime, I need you to delay the trial proceedings as much as possible. Walsh had agreed to file for continuances, but he warned Thompson that Judge Hernandez wasn't known for her patience with delays. The judge wants to move this case quickly, especially given the media attention. I can probably buy you a few weeks, but not much more. As word of the classified complications spread through government channels, the story eventually reached the Pentagon, where it landed on the desk of Admiral Robert Chun, the Navy's top intelligence officer. Chun had served with Admiral Sterling early in both their careers and understood the sensitivity of deep current operations. When Chun learned that one of Sterling's former assets was facing stolen Valor charges while wearing what appeared to be legitimately earned military decorations, he realized there might be a solution that no one else had considered. Rebecca, Chun said when he called Sterling, what if we approach this differently? Instead of trying to make the case disappear, what if we legitimize her right to wear those decorations? Sterling was intrigued, but skeptical. How? She never served in conventional military units. Those patches and medals represent specific military achievements. Actually, Chun replied, they might represent exactly the kind of achievements she's made. I've been reviewing the deep current files, and the training and operations these people conducted were equivalent to some of our most elite military programs. There's precedent for awarding military decorations for intelligence service. Chun's idea was audacious, but legally sound. Under certain circumstances, civilians who performed extraordinary service in support of military operations could be awarded military decorations. It was rare, but it had happened before, particularly in classified operations where traditional recognition wasn't possible. The proposal would require approval from the highest levels of government, including the Secretary of Defense and ultimately the President. But, if approved, it would allow Sarah to legitimately claim the military honors she was accused of stealing, while providing a cover story that satisfied the public without exposing operational details. Over the next week, a carefully orchestrated campaign began to unfold. Selected veterans groups received anonymous tips about irregularities in Sarah's case. Defense contractors with ties to the intelligence community quietly lobbied for a review of her background. Congressional staffers with appropriate security clearances were briefed on general terms about the complexities involved. The breakthrough came when Admiral Sterling herself made an unprecedented decision. Despite the risks to operational security, she requested permission to travel to Seattle and meet with the key figures in Sarah's case. Her plan was to reveal just enough classified information to resolve the situation while maintaining the deeper secrets of Operation Deep Current. Back in Portland, Sarah was unaware of the intense government activity surrounding her case. She spent her days in her childhood bedroom, trying to piece together memories from her summer abroad, and wondering if there really was more to her story than she had understood. The memories came back in fragments. She remembered intensive training sessions that seemed far more advanced than anything she would need for academic research. She recalled learning about surveillance techniques, secure communications, and cultural infiltration methods. Most troubling of all, she began to remember assignments during that summer that had taken her to various locations across Eastern Europe, assignments that she had been told were field research, but which now seemed much more purposeful. One memory in particular haunted her. Near the end of the program, she had been sent to a conference in Prague where she was instructed to observe certain attendees and report back on their conversations and activities. At the time, she had assumed it was some kind of advanced sociology project. Now she wondered if she had actually been conducting surveillance on foreign intelligence operatives. The tattoo on her arm, which she had always assumed was decorative, began to seem more significant as well. The design was intricate and specific, not the kind of generic artwork you would typically get as a souvenir. There were elements in the design that seemed almost like code, though Sarah lacked the expertise to decipher what they might mean. As her court date approached, Walsh continued to file for delays while mysterious federal attorneys worked behind the scenes. Sarah grew increasingly frustrated with the lack of communication about her case. "Mr. Walsh," she said during one of their meetings, "I feel like I'm being kept in the dark about my own defense. You keep telling me that there are complications, but you won't tell me what they are." Walsh was in an impossible position. He had been instructed not to reveal the classified aspects of her case, but he also had an ethical obligation to keep his client informed. "Sarah, I know this is frustrating, but there are aspects of your background that are being reviewed at very high levels of government. I can't give you specifics, but I believe there's a good chance that your case will be resolved favorably." "What does that mean? Are they going to drop the charges? Are they going to prove that I actually have military service? I need to understand what's happening to my life." Before Walsh could respond, his phone rang. The caller identified himself as Admiral Rebecca Sterling and requested an immediate meeting with both Walsh and Sarah. "I'm flying to Seattle tonight," Sterling said. "This case requires my personal attention." As Walsh hung up the phone, he realized that Sarah's case was about to take another dramatic turn. An active-duty admiral didn't personally intervene in federal criminal cases unless there were extraordinary circumstances involved. For Sarah, the news that a high-ranking military officer wanted to meet with her was both terrifying and hopeful. She had no idea who Admiral Sterling was or why her case would interest someone at that level of the military hierarchy. But she sensed that she was finally going to get answers to questions that had been haunting her since her arrest. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening, and both Walsh and Sarah were instructed to meet Sterling at a secure federal building in downtown Seattle. As they prepared for what promised to be a pivotal moment in Sarah's case, neither of them could have imagined just how dramatically their understanding of the entire situation was about to change. The federal building in downtown Seattle felt like a fortress as Sarah and her attorney James Walsh passed through multiple security checkpoints on their way to the meeting with Admiral Sterling. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as armed guards checked their identification and escorted them through corridors lined with official portraits of government officials she didn't recognize. They were led to a secure conference room on the building's top floor, where Admiral Rebecca Sterling was waiting. At 58, Sterling commanded respect with her bearing alone. Her uniform displayed decades of service ribbons and decorations, and her eyes carried the weight of someone who had made decisions that affected national security for most of her adult life. "Ms. Martinez," Sterling said as she stood to greet them. "Thank you for coming. Please, both of you sit down. We have a great deal to discuss." Sarah studied the Admiral's face, looking for some clue about what was to come. "Admiral, I have to say, I'm completely confused about why someone of your rank is interested in my case. I'm not military. I've never claimed to be military. This whole thing is just a terrible misunderstanding." Sterling's expression softened slightly. "Ms. Martinez, I'm here because you're wrong about something important. You have served your country, and you've served with distinction. The problem is that you were never supposed to know about it." Walsh leaned forward in his chair. "Admiral, I need to understand exactly what you're claiming here. Are you saying my client has classified military service?" "Not military service in the traditional sense," Sterling replied carefully, "but service to her country that is every bit as valuable and dangerous as anything performed by our conventional forces." She turned her attention back to Sarah. "Tell me about the summer you spent abroad in 2004. The program you participated in through the Eastern European Studies Consortium." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't mentioned that program to anyone except Walsh, and even then, only recently. "How do you know about that?" "It was just a study abroad program. We did research on post-communist societies and cultural transitions." "What else do you remember about that summer?" Sterling pressed gently. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall details she had buried for nearly 20 years. "The training was more intensive than I expected. We learned about surveillance techniques, which they said was for sociological observation. We studied cryptography, which they said was for understanding historical codes. And we traveled to various conferences and events throughout the region." "At these conferences and events, what were you asked to do?" "We were supposed to observe people, listen to conversations, and report back on what we heard. They said it was for academic research about political and economic developments in the region." Sarah paused, a terrible suspicion growing in her mind. "But it wasn't academic research, was it?" Sterling shook her head. You were conducting intelligence-gathering operations for the Central Intelligence Agency, Ms. Martinez. You and 19 other college students were recruited for Operation Deep Current, one of the most successful intelligence programs in modern U.S. history. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Walsh was the first to speak. Are you saying that my client was working as a spy without knowing it? That's exactly what I'm saying, Sterling confirmed. The beauty of Deep Current was that our assets were completely genuine in their cover stories. As far as you knew, Ms. Martinez, you were just a talented student participating in an academic program. That authenticity made you invisible to foreign counterintelligence services. Sarah's mind was reeling. But why are you telling me this now? If it's so secret, why risk exposing it? Sterling pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a photo from her arrest. In the image, Sarah's tattoo was clearly visible on her left forearm. Because of this, that tattoo identifies you as a Deep Current asset. When I saw it in the arrest photos, I realized we had a situation that required immediate action. The tattoo? I thought it was just decorative, something to commemorate the program. Every element of that design has meaning, Sterling explained. The geometric patterns indicate your operational area. The symbol in the center identifies your handler. Even the colors have significance. To anyone with the right knowledge, that tattoo is a complete dossier of your service record. Walsh was taking notes furiously. So the stolen Valor charges are actually invalid because she does have legitimate claim to military honors. It's more complicated than that, Sterling said. Ms. Martinez never served in conventional military units, so she doesn't technically have the right to wear those specific decorations. However, the service she performed was equivalent to some of our most elite military operations. Sterling opened a classified folder and removed several documents. Over the course of that summer, you provided intelligence that helped prevent 3 terrorist attacks, identified a network of arms dealers operating across 4 countries, and gathered economic intelligence that saved the U.S. government hundreds of millions of dollars in trade negotiations. Your work directly contributed to national security objectives. Sarah stared at the documents, unable to process what she was hearing. I prevented terrorist attacks? I don't remember anything like that. You wouldn't, Sterling replied. You were given specific tasks without knowing the larger context. When you observed those men at the conference in Prague and reported their conversation about shipping schedules, you didn't know they were planning to smuggle weapons to terrorist cells. When you noted the financial documents you saw at that trade meeting in Budapest, you couldn't have known they revealed corruption that was undermining NATO operations. The Admiral continued. Your reports were combined with intelligence from other sources to create actionable intelligence. You were one piece of a much larger puzzle, but an essential piece. Walsh looked up from his notes. What you're describing sounds like service worthy of military recognition. Is there a way to officially acknowledge Ms. Martinez's contribution? Sterling nodded. That's why I'm here. We've prepared a package for emergency military decoration that will officially recognize Ms. Martinez's service to her country. The decorations won't be identical to the ones on the jacket she was wearing, but they will be legitimate military honors that justify her right to wear military insignia. She pulled out another document. The President has personally approved the award of the Defense Intelligence Medal, the Joint Service Commendation Medal, and the National Intelligence Service Medal. These are among the highest honors available for intelligence work. Sarah was overwhelmed. But won't this expose the whole program? If you give me military medals, people will want to know why. We've prepared a cover story, Sterling explained. The official record will show that you provided technical consulting services to military intelligence during your college years. It's vague enough to protect operational details, while specific enough to justify the awards. Walsh smiled for the first time since taking Sarah's case. This completely changes everything. When we present this evidence to the court, it will not only clear the stolen Valor charges, but actually prove that Ms. Martinez has more legitimate claim to military honors than most veterans. But Sterling held up a hand. Before we proceed, I need Ms. Martinez to understand what she's accepting. Once these decorations are officially awarded, your service will become part of your permanent record. You'll be entitled to certain veterans' benefits, but you'll also have ongoing security obligations. Some aspects of your work will always remain classified. Sarah thought about the past month of her life. The arrest, the media attention, the death threats. the destruction of her reputation. What happens if I say no? Can I just go back to my old life? Unfortunately, no, Sterling said gently. Your connection to Deep Current is already in government files. The only way to protect you going forward is to give you official status that explains your background without revealing operational details. Walsh looked at his client with concern. Sarah, this is an enormous decision. You need to understand what you're agreeing to. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline where her nightmare had begun. After a long moment, she turned back to Sterling. If I really did help prevent terrorist attacks, if my work actually saved lives, then I want that recognized. All my life, I've wondered if I was making any real difference in the world. If you're telling me that I already have, then, yes, I want these honors. Sterling smiled. Then, let's make this official. The ceremony took place the following day in a secure room at the federal courthouse. Judge Hernandez, who had been briefed on the classified aspects of the case, presided over an extraordinary hearing where Sarah was simultaneously cleared of all charges and honored for military service she had never known she performed. Admiral Sterling personally presented the decorations, each one representing years of classified service that had contributed to national security. The media, which had vilified Sarah just days earlier, struggled to understand how a stolen valor case had transformed into a military honors ceremony. The veterans who had called for Sarah's prosecution were among the most surprised observers. Many of them attended the ceremony and approached Sarah afterward to apologize for their harsh judgment and to thank her for her service. I had no idea, said retired Army Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, who had been among the most vocal critics during her arrest. When I saw you wearing those decorations, I thought you were mocking everything we fought for. Now I understand that you earned the right to wear them, just in a different way than the rest of us. The story became national news again, but this time with a completely different narrative. Sarah went from being a symbol of disrespect toward veterans to an example of the hidden heroes who served their country in ways the public never knows about. The thrift store jacket that had started the entire ordeal was eventually traced back to its original owner, a veteran named Robert Chun who had donated his father's belongings after his death. Chun's father had served with distinction in Vietnam, earning the very decorations that Sarah had unknowingly worn. When Chun learned the full story, he asked to meet Sarah personally. My father would have been proud to know that his decorations were worn by someone who served their country with such honor, Chun told Sarah when they met. He always said that military service comes in many forms, and that the most important service often happens where no one can see it. 6 months later, Sarah returned to work in the tech industry, but with a new perspective on her life and career. She began volunteering with veterans organizations, using her technical skills to help former service members transition to civilian careers. She also became an advocate for recognition of non-traditional military service, working to ensure that other intelligence assets received proper acknowledgement for their contributions. The tattoo on her arm, which had once been a meaningless reminder of a college summer abroad, became a source of pride. Sarah had it professionally enhanced to incorporate elements recognizing her official military decorations, creating a unique piece of art that told the story of service she had performed without ever knowing its true significance. Admiral Sterling, who had risked her career to resolve Sarah's case, was promoted to head of naval intelligence, partly in recognition of her handling of the Deep Current situation. She maintained contact with Sarah and the other former assets, ensuring that they received appropriate support as they adjusted to their new understanding of their past service. The case also led to a comprehensive review of how the government handles former intelligence assets. New protocols were established to ensure that people who had served their country in classified capacities would receive appropriate recognition and support, even if their service had to remain partially secret. Sarah's story became a teaching case at the Naval War College, used to illustrate the complexity of modern intelligence operations and the importance of protecting assets who serve their country in unconventional ways. Her experience also influenced new legislation that expanded the definition of military service to include certain types of intelligence work. Years later, when Sarah looked back on that terrible morning when she had grabbed a jacket from a thrift store, she marveled at how a simple mistake had uncovered a truth about her life that she had never known. The stolen valor charges had been dropped, but she had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that she had served her country with honor and that her work had made a real difference in protecting American lives. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had been arrested for wearing military decorations she hadn't earned, only to discover that she had actually earned the right to wear them through service she had never known she performed. In the end, the tattoo that had seemed like nothing more than a college memento had proven to be the key to understanding her true contribution to her country's security. Sarah Martinez had gone from accused fake soldier to decorated intelligence veteran, and her story became a reminder that heroism often comes in forms that the public never sees or understands. Her case proved that sometimes the most important service members are the ones who don't even know they're serving, and that the true measure of military honor isn't always found in traditional battlefields, but in the quiet courage of those who risk everything for their country's safety.